We've all used software that feels like walking into a casino. Pop-ups flashing, notification badges blinking, toolbars sliding in from every direction. It is a chaotic experience where isolated teams have built competing features that are all aggressively vying for your attention. This is what product leaders call the Vedas effect. When a product turns into a casino, the business metrics follow a predictable downward trajectory. Daily active users, or DAUs, begin to drop as the core utility gets buried under noise. Simultaneously, customer acquisition costs rise because the product's value proposition is too convoluted to explain clearly to new buyers. The root cause of this interface chaos is usually organizational. It happens when a company operates as a feature factory. Instead of making hard strategic choices about what the product is actually for, the team attempts to appease every possible user request, shipping features on an endless conveyor belt. Real product strategy is not a roadmap listing everything you plan to build. It is an exercise in ruthless focus and deliberate omission. It is the active decision to ignore 99 good ideas to pursue the one that drives your core business metric. To escape the feature factory, you need a framework that forces alignment. We use a model called the segmentation stack. It builds upward in 4 distinct layers: raw data, cohort ICP, market context, and finally, team topology. This stack bridges the gap between high-level theory and daily execution. It moves product leadership away from relying on generic market research and qualitative guesses, pushing the organization towards a mathematically rigorous, structurally aligned operating model. Without a rigorously defined mathematical stack, products inevitably optimize for noise. They try to be everything to everyone, which completely confuses the entire interface and ultimately destroys the core value proposition for the people who actually need it. Building the stack starts with identifying your ideal customer profile, or ICP. A true ICP is not a static, qualitative marketing persona with a fictional name like Manager Mary and a list of assumed hobbies. It must be derived entirely from empirical behavioral data. This chart shows a classic cohort retention heat map. We use it to discover a valid ICP by tracking groups of users over time. The time intervals are mapped across the top, and specific acquisition cohorts, groups of users who signed up under the same conditions, are listed down the side. If we scan horizontally across the rows, we can identify which specific acquisition sources yield sustained long-term usage. These dark rows represent cohorts that maintain their density and keep coming back month after month, while the fading rows represent users who quickly churn to zero. We can also read this data vertically to look for behavioral triggers. Here, we see a sharp percentage increase in retention for users who cross a specific threshold, like inviting 3 colleagues or running their first report. By crossing those 2 axes, we finalize the mathematical parameters of the ICP. This is a highly specific segment that proves high behavioral retention, requires a low customer acquisition cost, and justifies long-term lifetime value. Once that specific cohort is identified, the product team has a clear mandate. They must pivot all development resources, design hours, and engineering sprints to exclusively serve the needs of those proven users, deliberately ignoring feature requests from segments that do not fit the profile. Defining an ICP through demographics instead of behavioral retention data is a critical error. It results in companies spending millions of dollars engineering features for users who are statistically guaranteed to churn out of the product anyway. Once the ICP is identified mathematically, the product strategy has to adapt to the structural realities of its specific market. The mechanics of growth change entirely depending on whether you are building for consumers or for businesses. In a B2C product strategy, the ICP is a single, isolated user node. The growth engine relies on driving that individual through a continuous psychological loop, a trigger, an action, and a variable reward. Netflix excels at this single-node habituation. They use vast amounts of viewing data to push highly personalized content to individual accounts, making sure each user finds something they want to watch every time they open the app. In a B2B product strategy, the ICP does not exist in a vacuum. They exist within a complex organizational system. Multiple users connect to shared databases, and their combined output flows hierarchically upward to a central administration point. Enterprise growth is driven by cross-functional collaboration, security, and measurable business return on investment. It relies on team efficiency, not isolated dopamine loops. Applying B2C individual habituation tactics to a complex B2B network problem actively harms enterprise adoption. You cannot scale a product across an organization if your strategy ignores the corporate hierarchy that dictates how software is actually purchased and deployed. This brings us to the fundamental B2B dilemma. A successful enterprise strategy must satisfy two distinct groups with completely different jobs to be done. First is the user persona. These are the individuals doing the actual daily work. They are seeking functional utility, emotional delight, and frictionless design to make their specific tasks easier and faster to complete. Companies like Figma and Slack engineer bottom-up viral loops by catering explicitly to this user. They make their core collaboration tools completely free for the user persona, removing all barriers to entry so teams can invite each other organically. This organic adoption eventually hits a critical mass, creating what is known as a Product Qualified Lead, or PQL. This is the exact moment the software recognizes that a whole department is now relying on the free tool to function. At that precise moment, the product's focus shifts to the second group, the economic buyer. This person is sitting at the top of that hierarchy, and they do not care about a frictionless user interface. They prioritize data security, compliance, license management, and overall ROI. The PQL provides the sales team with empirical usage data and a built-in base of internal champions. This allows the software company to bypass traditional, slow, top-down sales cycles and approach the economic buyer with a proven deployment already operating inside their firewall. True product-led growth acts as a Trojan horse. The product delights the end user, specifically to harvest the engagement data required to logically and mathematically convert the economic buyer. Identifying these user and buyer segments is the strategy, but the most mathematically sound product plan will still fail if the internal organizational structure is not aligned to execute it. This requires applying the concept of team topologies, the intentional mapping of internal engineering and product teams to specific customer segments or stages of the user journey. A severe operational failure occurs when leadership assigns a single product team to serve both the user persona and the economic buyer simultaneously. A team cannot prioritize frictionless viral onboarding for individuals while simultaneously locking down administrative access controls for enterprise IT. The solution is structural bifurcation. Dedicated product teams must be assigned exclusively to distinct nodes in the value chain. One autonomous team optimizes strictly for viral user adoption, while a completely separate team builds for enterprise compliance. A single product team cannot optimize for competing outcomes. The internal architecture of your company must directly mirror your external market strategy. Otherwise, you will inevitably drift back into operating as a disorganized feature factory. This brings us to the complete sequence of the segmentation stack: finding the ICP via cohorts, adapting to B2B mechanics, splitting the user from the buyer, and aligning team topologies to those distinct segments. To test if this stack is operating correctly, we apply Gibson-Batel's DHM framework. A successful product must delight customers, create hard-to-copy advantages, and be margin-enhancing. Targeting the user persona satisfies the first two requirements. By obsessively solving the end user's daily problems, the product creates delight and builds a massive bottom-up adoption moat that is incredibly hard for competitors to copy. Converting the economic buyer via PQLs satisfies the final requirement. By using that massive adoption moat to justify enterprise-wide contracts, the product strategy becomes highly margin-enhancing, driving sustainable revenue. Modern product leadership is not about managing a backlog of features. It is the deliberate mathematical and structural alignment of user delight and economic value.